now.
Okay, I think the point that this viewer is making here is that the LTT contributed to the violence that took place. Look, the LTT is also...
Well, exactly, but exactly, I see that point, but as I said, that when a community is under existential threat, and has been over time, in the 1983 riots, the LTT wasn't the contributing factor, it was a minor factor. The riots erupted and there were pogroms. Right? The LTT might contribute, but resistance is inevitable. Right? It's inevitable because if there is no resistance, the community can get wiped out, as happened in Rwanda. Look at the Jewish situation. I mean, the Jewish people didn't resist. Right? They had no organized form of resistance, except right at the end with the Warsaw Ghetto. Now, I don't want to, use scale. There's an issue of scale here because there were 6 million Jews and there are only 2 million Tamils in Sri Lanka to start with, right? So we can't use the same scale. But I'm talking about the process and the fact that if resistance doesn't happen, then what does happen? And you're basically, it's a bad situation either way. You either resist or you don't resist. If you resist, you become a terrorist, as per, the new terrorism doctrine of Mr. Rove and the Bush administration. If you do resist, if you don't resist, well, what happens?
Okay,
things can deteriorate.
Can I just...
If I may bring this back
to
the current situation, I think debating the past probably has a role, but I don't think we should become a captive of the past. Clearly, the LTTE, with its activities and the brutal way in which it enforced itself, did radically distort the dialogue in Sri Lanka. This is an open moment. There are democratic institutions. There are democratically elected Tamil, Muslim, and Sinhala members of parliament. The economic freedoms and the political freedoms are available in Sri Lanka, however imperfect, however distorted they may have been. But free of the LTTE, I think we now have an opportunity within Sri Lanka to sit and talk as brothers and sisters and move this dialogue forward. Debating the past may have a role, but I don't think we should be a captive of the past, nor should we be drawing overblown parallels.
We have a recent past.
Okay, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that, Jan, but we have to take a short break right now. We'll have more of our discussion with our guests in Melbourne. And as we pause, let me remind you that you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. You can see the debate taking place there right now. We're also taking a poll in our chat room where we're asking, do you think Tamil accusations of genocide against the Sri Lankan government are justified? Let us know what you think, and we'll be back with those results after a short. Before we get back to our discussion, let's see the results of that chat room poll. Before the break, we asked, do you think Tamil accusations of genocide against the Sri Lankan government are justified? Well, 61% of you said yes, 39% of you said no. So those are the results. Let's get back to our discussion. And Dr. Neistat, I'm going to start with you this time. The Sri Lankan government have so far resisted calls for an international inquiry into what happened in the last few weeks, especially in that no-conflict zone. What is Human Rights Watch's position on that?
We absolutely believe that such a commission is a must. And going slightly back to the previous question, this commission should look into violations by both sides, because we as an organization definitely believe, based on our research, that both sides in this conflict are responsible for egregious human rights abuses. And LTTE is obviously one of the sides. They're responsible for massive forcible recruitment, for using civilians as human shields, and one of the reasons so many people died in this called no-fire zone, a conflict zone, is because LTT did not allow these civilians to leave. And no matter how much anybody in the Tamil community would try to deny it, this information is based on interviews with people who were there, and I would stand by it. And of course, unfortunately, the government used the abusive practices of LTT to respond with its own indiscriminate campaign, and it indiscriminately shelled these areas where civilians were gathering, hospitals, and as a result we have massive civilian casualties. We do believe that given that during the conflict almost nobody had access to these areas, now it can only be subject to an international investigation and eventually accountability. And I do believe that without such investigation and such accountability, it will be very, very difficult to make next step in Sri Lanka's development.
Okay, I want to go to one of our viewers now. This is Vijay calling from Geneva. Vijay, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, hello there. I have two quick comments and the question for the ambassador. My first comment is really that I do think matters of whether there's a genocide or not are far too serious to be subject to an opinion poll on cable television, frankly. My second comment relates to my question. The ambassador said in one of his responses that Sri Lanka guarantees political freedoms. However, we all know that there have been significant concerns over, for instance, the freedom of expression, the disappearances and killings of journalists in Sri Lanka. And that raises serious concerns because right now, just today, for instance, one of the Sri Lankan ministers has talked about early local elections in Jaffna and other towns in the north. And it to me appears to be quite cynical to expect a population that is so traumatized by war and such heavy losses to expect them to go out and vote anywhere in the near future, let alone even in the next year or year and a half before there is an effective rebuilding of their own lives and their own social fabric. So it appears that the Sri Lankan government, despite its rhetoric of including the Tamils in a democratic process, it's really what I fear will happen eventually is a process that will lack credibility, that will lack real substantive inclusion.
Okay, Vijay,
and lead to the same problems all over again.
Let me put those questions that you raised to the ambassador.
I think two things. The sooner we start a process of reconciliation, the better off, because currently there's a vacuum that needs to be filled. And secondly, I think the more quicker that we restart the democratic institutions and restore democratic freedoms across the board that have been shaved in the context of a war on terrorism, as has happened in many other countries, including here in the United States. This rebalancing has to occur. I don't think there's the option to postpone or calibrate these to a finer tune, but I think the reconciliation process, however difficult that is going to be, must start, and I think the government has clearly indicated that. Restoration of democratic institutions must begin as soon as possible. I don't think anybody could debate that.
Yes, go ahead, Jen.
Can I just say something to the viewer who said that the opinion poll on cable television is not a sufficient indicator? I agree with him, but I can disclose to you a conversation that I had with Mr. Ban Ki-moon's political division director in the UN about 3 weeks ago, before we knew the full extent of the massacre, before the LTTE stopped its guns and that full extent about 3 weeks ago. What they said was that there was a genuine debate. When we raised the genocide question, they said there was a 50-50 split, or a split within the UN itself, within the advisors, as to whether this was genocide or not. And because they wanted to help the people, they didn't want to get into the labeling right then. But they did accept that there was a division of opinion both ways, and credibly so. And what that means by that acceptance is that if there is a realistic prospect of genocide, the UN had an obligation to intervene, and it has failed us. And as to Dr. Nistad's point that there were no observers, well, the UN chose to leave. It says that it chose to leave because it was asked to, but after all, it is the UN. So the UN chose to leave, unlike Rwanda, where it stayed, however weakly. It has learned something. I accept that the UN has learned since 1994. What it has learned to do is to shut its eyes better, so it can say that we don't know. And we also know about the figures. There were satellite images which were available to the UN, and the figures were available to the UN, and we only found them out through leaks. So that's the point. Yes, an opinion poll isn't sufficient, but the UN itself has accepted it was credible.
All right, I want to go to another one of our viewers.
The allegation is a credible allegation as per the UN, and I have witnesses for that. I have members of parliament in the UK.
All right, Jen, I want to go to our viewers who've been calling in. This is Besaram calling from the United Kingdom. Besaram, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to find out that how do they justify killing of all the moderate Tamil leadership by the LTTE?
So you were saying that the moderate Tamil leadership was eliminated by the LTTE?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me put that question to Jan.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't. You would have to ask the LTTE that, but I don't really see why we should justify it. What we're saying is that there is a genocide against the Tamil people. You can ask the LTT what you like. What I would say to you is about the use of the term moderate. Now, unlike, for example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there has never been any denial on any Tamil side of the right to exist of the Sri Lankan people. So there is no Holocaust denial, and there is no there is Holocaust denial on the Sri Lankan side. Or genocide denial, but there has not been a right to exist denial on the Tamil side. So the Tamil position has been simply a request for self-determination, which the Tamils are entitled to under United Nations law. That is a moderate position.
All right, Jan,
I don't really understand how that is an extreme position.
Jan, we're rapidly running out of time. We've got about 30 seconds left, and Ambassador, I'm going to give you the last word on this. This question, why, and we got this question from one of our viewers, Aslam from the United Kingdom. He said, why is the Sri Lankan government resisting calls from the UN to conduct humanitarian help for displaced Tamils and indeed allow aid workers into the camps?
What I'm reading that's in the public domain is that the ICRC has gone back. There were issues that had to be addressed, and I'm very confident that as a democratic government, as a democratic system of governance, the country will make these corrections and move forward with all the help of the international community.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And thank you for watching. On the next show, North Korea's missile launch on Monday could push the reclusive state deeper into isolation. We take a look at the political fallout of the nuclear test. See you then.